It's going to be very difficult for Shaun Micallefs to be able to send this up.
Wiki wiki wah, wiki 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 wah wah wah, wiki 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 wah wah wah. Wiki wah. Thank you. Well, it's amazing, isn't it? Accusations of racial vilification, bullying, using his faith as a marketing tool, being an autocrat, not being fit for office, having no moral compass, and Scott Morrison's approval rating goes up while Anthony Albanese's goes down. Then again, maybe that's what you want in the leader of a country, someone who's willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done, assuming the job is getting into and staying in office regardless of the consequences. None of your mamby-pamby caring for the aged bullshit. No, we want a bad boy. Now, I know we're not supposed to show our bias here on the ABC, and by and large, I think we do a pretty good job of disguising our true allegiance to Xi Jinping. I must say, in all seriousness, I thought Albo got a raw deal last week, having to follow Vladimir Zelensky to do his budget reply. I mean, you know, great, but, you know, it was like having Bruce Springsteen open for you and then you come out and play the spoons. On the plus side, though, I've never seen Parliament so well behaved. The PM didn't turn his chair around and scroll through his phone. Peter Dutton didn't move the Ukrainian president not be heard anymore. No points of order from Tony Burke. Albo didn't yell, sit down, Buffhead. It made me proud to be an Australian. I think we should have world leaders watching our politicians by Zoom all the time. Who's with me? Yeah! At the very least, it would certainly speed things up because, you know, New Zealand offers to take our refugees. 9 years later, we say yes. Zelensky asked for some of our Bushmaster armoured vehicles and we say yes the next day. So Albo had a hard act to follow, particularly given opposition leader in waiting Josh Frydenberg stole his thunder by emphasising several times that his budget was focused on easing the cost of living pressures on Australian families.
My focus is on winning the election.
Oh, my bad. Anyway, Albo, who's looking great, by the way, tried attacking Josh's budget with an analogy reflective of his own obsession with cosmetic appearance.
Well, this has all the sincerity of a fake tan.
Now, of course, there'd be no need for fake tan if someone would just grant the PM's request to take him to the April sun in Cuba. The popularity of leaders aside, this week's poll has Labor well ahead, but what if the PM pulls another miracle out of his arse? Even a small one that results in a hung parliament. If neither party wins enough seats, what sort of thing might a blackmailing crossbencher insist the minority government do in exchange for their vote?
I would immediately move to providing a rifle for every single boy and girl too, if they want them, in an armoury in every single school in Australia.
And just to give some context, he's from Queensland. So what do you think about the Bobcat Young Guns proposal? Some might say it's inappropriate for thousands of children to run around school with rifles, but would we rather they just look at their phones all day? Let's do a straw poll, shall we? Phones or guns? Phones? Guns? Oh dear. All right. Folks at home, send your answers to us, care of the ABC, and you could win a Concetto Fioravanti well. Fully installed in your home, complete with a lifelike effigy of Scott Morrison at the bottom. That's karma. Speaking of which, the PM can't cut a trick at the moment, although if I were him, it'd be the one where he tries to control Angus Taylor using the power of his mind, because clearly that one isn't working. But the inane stream media seem to be twitting the PM for everything that comes out of his mouth these days, including this perfectly reasonable comment that people having trouble renting should buy a house instead. Now, this wasn't some clueless, out-of-touch Marie Antoinette let-them-eat cake moment. Was it former ballet dancer, but now full-time Marie Antoinette impersonator at children's parties because of the lack of support for the arts in the budget, Wilma Spade-Colander?
Nah, too right, Shaun. Look, all the PM meant was that if people are finding the rental market a bit too expensive, They should take advantage of the government's very generous first home guarantee, which lowers the minimum deposit for a mortgage from 20% to 5% for 50,000 people lucky enough not to have enough money or a place to live. I mean, this bloody Marie Antoinette comparison would only be valid if when her courtier had come to her and said the peasants are starving and have no bread, she'd replied, well, they should take advantage of our first cake eaters scheme. The first 50,000 peasants who've never eaten cake before can borrow some money and buy a cake for 5% deposit.
And are people who can't afford the 20% deposit being done any favours getting into the housing market just before interest rates are set to rise?
Well, if the peasants' circumstances, which prevented them from scraping together the other 15% of the price of cake in the first place, means they can't service the loan because wage growth is stagnant, inflation is up and interest rates do rise, as you say, which they probably will because demand will be up owing to the very fact of the government scheme, Marie Antoinette would have gone on to tell her courtier to tell the peasants that they're on their own and the cake will likely be repossessed by the bank in the not-too-distant future and sold to someone who can afford it.
Right. For use as an investment property, making the rental market even more difficult to enter than it was originally.
Well, Shaun, as they say, you can't have your cake and eat it too because of the risk of negative equity.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Wilma Spade Collender. Of course, it's not just the media who've been piling onto our PM this last week or those across the chamber. People from his own party have again accused him of things, not in texts this time, but in farewell speeches and sworn depositions. Terrible things. Terrible, awful and, for a normal politician, career-destroying things. But the PM, as we know, is anything but normal, and he has denied even the worst of these allegations consistently and exhaustively.
No.
It's very much a they said, he said situation. So who do we believe? Well, no less an authority, and it is hard to think of one, than former Prime Minister John Howard has helpfully weighed in on the bullying allegations, saying that the PM may be forceful, but is not a bully. John Howard joins me on the line from his home.
Hello, Shaun. Can you hear me? Am I speaking into the right end?
Yes, you are, Mr Howard. You say the PM is not a bully?
That is not my experience of him, Shaun. And he served as State Director of the New South Wales Division of the Liberal Party during the last 3 terms of my government.
Yes, but you were Prime Minister, so he's hardly going to be a bully to you, is he?
It's like those scurrilous accusations that we are a racist country. That, too, as I'm on record as saying, has not been my experience.
Right, so therefore none of these problems exist?
Exactly, nor has Scott Morrison ever backgrounded against me as he is alleged to have done against Michael Toke during the pre-selection battle of the seat of Cook back in 2007. And Shaun, I can lay my hand on my heart and say that I have not, in my experience, ever been Michael Toke. Anyway, I'm going to go now, Shaun. Jeanette wants to switch over to Ambulance Australia.
OK, thank you, Mr Howard. John Howard there, Australia's oldest and some say living Prime Minister. But I don't think allegations of bullying and lying and racism should detract from the good work the PM has done this week on the international stage. And obviously I'm not talking about standing by like an idiot while Labor Party stooge China cut his lunch with Solomon Islands Prime Minister Sogavare. Sure, giving him a ukulele is nice, but you can't land a plane on it, board a ship from it or fire missiles out of it. And this has forced Scott Morrison to defend his government's role in the region.
Whenever there is a crisis or an issue to be dealt with in the Pacific region, the first call that's made is to Australia.
And when the phone rings out, they call China. But how do you manage this problem strategically?
One of the ways you deal with your Pacific family is you deal with it as family.
Oh, well, OK. Well, so, Prime Minister Sogavare, if you're watching, you're grounded from going out with your Chinese friends for 2 weeks. Your pocket money from Australia is halved and no TV till you finish your homework. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to talk about this embarrassing mess with a Pacific neighbour. I want to talk about how great the PM has been providing our Bushmaster armoured personnel carriers to Ukraine to help them win the war with Russia. Valet parking attendant for the Defence Materials Department, Walben Hecht. How many are we sending over?
4. And it's been a logistical nightmare, Shaun. Which do I back out of the shed first? Do we parallel or angle park once we got them into the C-21 cargo transports? And what kind of penalty do we charge the Ukrainians if they don't fill up the tank when they return them?
Yeah, 4 doesn't sound that many.
Not sure we can't leave ourselves undefended if China attacks us. We need the other one to hide behind in the event of an invasion.
What about the insurance on these bushmasters? Do the premiums go up because they're actually being used now?
No, you'd have to talk to DFAT about that, Shaun. My job is to hose them off when they get back. Defence looks after what they do when they get there, and Foreign Affairs handles the delicate negotiations as to whether or not we deduct the cost of hiring them out from the aid package.
Hold that thought. Thumbelina Stent, you're the Chief Advisor to our Foreign Affairs Minister, Marise Payne.
A master of diplomacy, Shaun, if ever there was one.
Really?
Well, she has to be when you're working so closely with Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison. Man, what a couple of douchebags.
Well, how much will these bushmasters we're sending to Ukraine cost us, do you think?
Oh, they're a mere drop in the ocean, Shaun.
Are you talking about the cost or the bushmasters themselves when they fall out of the aeroplane on the way over?
Well, what does price matter when you're talking about the defence of a nation?
Well, it certainly didn't seem to matter when we cancelled that submarine contract. How much was that for again?
More than $5 billion.
More than $5 billion for nothing. Value for money, do you think?
Well, Shaun, the Department of Foreign Affairs likes to think of itself as above politics, but let me tell you, those Labor numbnuts would have cocked all this up far worse than we did. Remember what Scott said last week about Anthony Albanese?
You know, he knows the cost of nothing.
Well, I think we all know the cost of nothing now. It's more than $5 billion.
Plus interest.
Well, thank you very much, Thumbelina Stent.
Thank you.
Later in Foreign Affairs, we ask, is China's denial of access for the Australian ambassador to the trial of TV presenter Chang Lei just another example of their it's my way or Huawei attitude? Plus, controllable magnetic slime robots. Would that have been a far easier way for Scott Morrison to get the candidates he wanted for the New South Wales pre-selection? But to finance now, and Tosh Greenslade, some big gains in the ASX today.
That's exactly right, Shaun.
Thanks very much, Tosh. And can I just say that Josh Frydenberg has every right to look as happy as he does about formulating that budget of his. On the one hand, it helps struggling Australians, and on the other exhibits his skills as a good economic manager for the upcoming election, while on the still further hand, isn't so good that the government will actually win, so that when Scott Morrison gets dumped, Josh will get a shot at the Liberal leadership. So someone to watch, isn't he, PM Media Medea Donald McAngadine?
Yes, Shaun. Very, very closely. Look at this moment I caught at their press conference the next day. You can almost see Josh's soul being inhaled, Dementor style, out of his body.
It's fantastic. Well, what did you make of this comment by the PM this week?
We see this as economic bullying and coercion.
Well, I think that's a refreshingly honest description of the budget, Shaun.
No, he was actually talking about China's deal with the Solomon Islands.
Right, well, appalling then. That sort of behaviour's indefensible when you don't have an election looming.
I guess a big question this week for you, Donald, is how did the PM react to his character reference from outgoing New South Wales Liberal Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells?
An autocrat, a bully who has no moral compass.
Well, Shaun, ScoMo reacted the way he always reacts when people he's worked with call him names and try and diminish him unequivocally, particularly if they're women. He refers to them by their first name and characterises their response as an emotional one to a situation that has nothing to do with him.
Oh, well, look, I understand that Connie is disappointed that as 500 members of the Liberal Party came to select our candidates for the Senate at the next election, that she was unsuccessful. But if there are serious issues that Connie would like to raise about these things, then I would strongly encourage her to take any matters up with the party organisation. That's the right thing to do.
OK, so infantilise her by referring to her by her first name.
And imply that up until now you've been friendly with them, that's right.
All right, suggest that what she said is because 500 other people didn't want her.
Regardless of how close the actual ballot might have been.
And say that she took it personally.
Well, you know what women are like, Shaun.
So the PM isn't an autocrat or a bully and has a functioning moral compass.
ScoMo doesn't even know the meaning of the word autocrat, Shaun, nor do most of the Australians he's hoping to flim-flam into voting for him a second time. And as for a moral compass, who needs one today when you've got the sort of instinctive GPS ScoMo has that gets you where you need, by the shortest and most ruthless route necessary, regardless of who's standing in the way.
And the accusation that he's a bully?
Shaun, it's like Senator Jane Hume. A lady said it's an easy accusation to make.
Yeah, easy to make because there's ample evidence of it?
Shaun, Scott understands that people will take shots, although the only ones that really matter are the ones taken by his personal photographer. Look at this beauty of ScoMo wandering the bleak dystopian landscape of the 8th circle of hell.
Marginal seat?
Pretty safe, I reckon.
What about all this business about Michael Toke?
Shaun, ScoMo put an end to all this back in 2019.
Thank you.
Plus, we have the Treasurer on the record saying...
There's not a racist bone in Scott Morrison's body.
What about the bones in all the skeletons he has in his cupboard?
I can't speak for those, Shaun. I can only speak on behalf of those bones inhabiting ScoMo's current human form. Not a trace of racism, and he's willing to sign an X-ray to that effect.
Still, not everything Senator Fierravanti-Wells said about the PM was bad.
In my public life, I have met ruthless people. Morrison tops the list.
I mean, it must be nice to be leading in one poll.
As I and he have said, Shaun, ScoMo understands that Connie is disappointed, just as he understands Will Smith slapping Chris Rock and understands violent anti-vax protesters and understands how to weld.
Yep. One more question.
Thank you.
Oh, OK. Donald McCangadine, the PM's media Medea, lumbering out of the set like a bear in search of berries.
On this week's 1+1, Barry Cassidy talks to Brent Crude, Australia's leading security verification code provider.
I just make them up, Barry. I don't know where they come from. 514378, 719835. I don't know how I do it. And I don't want to overanalyze it in case I lose the gift. 342558, 638224. I don't want to sound big-headed, but it just comes very easily to me.
That's this week on 1+1.
723521.
This great white shark could kill you. So could Kevin Desmond Barrett. It's your choice.
Shaun Micallefs deep sea diving or argument at a pub. Sunday, 3:03.
Fascinating. Dutchie, as someone who used to work at the pram factory back when it actually made prams and is still active in the Wharf Review today, corralling the tumbleweeds after their jokes, what did you think of that last sketch?
As I once said when I was ranting, drunk and naked at an ABC board meeting back in the 70s, whether you are part of the woke left, whinging about everything, or stuck in the conservative past, or also whinging about everything, the collective unconscious moves inexorably forward.
As a bipedal human woman, guilty of unconscious ableism...
We are all progressives, albeit moving at different rates, simultaneously preserving and destroying the way we do things in the hope that things will magically get better for whichever group we belong to.
As I was about to interrupt...
Can I just say, as an ally of women, that I agree and I validate and elevate whatever that lady over there was going to say by talking over the top of her?
Again, I'm afraid not, as we have happily run out of time. Shaun?
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. Well, according to no less a source in the government's media centre, a more flexible approach to relocation assistance for short-term harvest workers has provided a timely boost to Queensland's farm workforce. But don't take their word for it. With some timely advice for job seekers, here's celebrity accountant and the federal government's ambassador for keeping the unemployment figures down in the lead-up to the election, Davey Plum. Davey.
They all here?
Well, there are density limits because of COVID.
I'm going anyway.
OK.
You call yourself job seekers, you sons of bitches? Because the bad news is we're all going to be job seekers unless we can keep the unemployment rate down to a figure with a fucking 3 in front of it. The good news is that if you do 2 weeks of agricultural work in a regional area, the government will give you $2,000. $4,000 more if you do 120 hours of work. $6,000. And all for picking A apples, B bananas, C carrots. And how? RATUJ. Relocation Assistance to Take Up a Job. Stuart Robert and David Littleprayer pay good money for this scheme. Pick the fruit and pick up $3 an hour. The fruit's lying around on the trees waiting for you to pick it. You don't? I have no sympathy for you. I can go out there tonight and make myself $15. Tonight, in 5 hours. Can you? You know what it takes to pick fruit? It takes a pulse to pick fruit. A pulse and no other options. Back to you, Shaun, you fucking cocksucker.
Thank you very much, Davey Plum. Davey. So what do we do with what little money we have to ensure the best return on our investment? Well, why am I asking you when I'm asking the question on your behalf? You can't answer back anyway, and presumably you don't know. Wendell, help me out here. It's so confusing.
It sure is, Shaun, and that's why I'm here to help.
I know. This is not a real conversation. It's an advertorial.
Let's look at the best places to have put your money over the last 5 years.
OK.
If you'd invested in gold in 2017, for example, you would have seen a 50% increase on your investment.
Wow.
If instead, though, you had invested your money in iron ore, you would have seen your investment increase 180%.
Well, that's amazing.
But if in 2017 you had instead invested $3,500 toward the Liberal National Party and you were from Construct International, a company worth just $8 with no staff, no assets and no revenue,
yes,
you wouldn't have gained anything because, as the company's chief executive recently explained, the company's small payments to political parties are not donations but were for dinners that provide companies with the opportunity to hear from senior MPs about policy.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Although, if in 2017 you'd proven yourself to be a great listener of one of those MPs, you would have been awarded, without a proper tender process, $1.5 billion in contracts.
Fuck me sideways.
Plus dinner, proving that the best investment of the last 5 years was in friendship.
Well, thank you very much, Wendell, and please accept on her behalf your own card.
Great. I like this one.
And coming up, a besieged leader surrounded by yes men makes concessions in areas he'd previously targeted in an effort to save face. Plus, a besieged leader surrounded by yes men makes concessions in areas he'd previously targeted in an effort to save face. Well, the question of who is Anthony Albanese has been well and truly answered by the man himself getting out and about in the community this week to let voters know what he's doing.
I'm running for Prime Minister.
Okay. So many things to unpack here. He's doing a voice as if the dog is speaking, but has the dog saying that it's running for Prime Minister? Whose idea was that? OK, very good. It's a great idea. Now, the government's decision to cut the fuel excise for 6 months is, according to Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers, a trap for the next government. But that's only if the next government is Labor, surely.
Well, it's a trap we are not going to fall into, Shaun.
How?
You can't fall into a trap for the next government if you're not the next government, can you?
Yes, but
politics is a long game, Shaun, and the last thing we want is to take over right when the government wants us to.
Exactly. We need to take over when they least expect it.
OK, and when would that be?
When they least expect it. Crank the vanilla candle wax out of your ears, soy boy.
It'd be when they have a popular leader with ideas for the future and a cabinet capable of implementing them.
So it could be a while.
A long, long while.
Then, when they least expect it...
And just when Australia is resigned to having yet another below-average coalition government led by incompetent and/or nakedly corrupt boobs...
We change leaders and start all over again.
Well, thank you very much, Team Albo. Well, Energy and, incredibly at the same time, Emissions Reduction Minister Angus Taylor has defended the $1 billion taxpayer-funded carbon credit scheme, which has been accused of fraud. The Emissions Reduction Fund, also known as EARTH, because that's the noise you make when you suddenly realise what's going on, is allegedly in the business of fake carbon reductions. Caretaker of overlooking completely one of Angus Taylor's portfolios, Dichotomy August, are carbon reduction credits real, or are we just imagining them because we are descending into madness?
Let me explain to you how they work. The Morrison government allows developers of emissions reductions projects to sell their so-called abatement on the open market, thus creating hundreds of million-dollar windfalls for this country's carbon traders as they trade in carbon offsets.
All right, and presumably reduce carbon emissions as well.
Yes, it reduces the need for investment in expensive carbon emission projects like capture and storage.
Yeah, well, reducing the projects that reduce emissions isn't quite the same as reducing emissions, is it? In fact, it's the opposite.
Let me explain it again. You own some land, okay? You plant some trees or you don't clear some trees. It doesn't matter. For every 1 ton of carbon stored in that tree, you get 2 carbon credits. You can sell the credits to the government for cash money at a fixed price, or you can sell them for more on the open market to corporate buyers looking for carbon offsets so they can meet their carbon neutral commitments. Are we clear?
Crystal. But isn't the problem that people are not cutting down trees they weren't going to cut down anyway, and are growing trees that are already there and getting carbon credits for basically doing nothing?
I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who works for an organization that powers its cameras and microphones with affordable energy that Angus provides and then questions the manner in which he provides it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, I suggest you pick up a solar panel or a wind turbine and go stand in a field somewhere. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think.
Did Angus get that Clover Moore PDF from Alan Jones?
You're goddamn right he did!
All right, well, thank you very much, Dichotomy.
Hughes Road, this week on Backroads.
Welcome back. Well, with the Department of Home Affairs set to establish a domestic terrorist register, will we have to use it, or could we still buy gifts from other places that might be cheaper? Winifreda Bubon investigates.
Neo-Nazis. Are they much of an improvement on the old ones? Semi-regular character Larry Sideburns admits to flirting with a number of objectionable things throughout his life, including his wife, Evadne.
I'm off.
Most recently, though, it's been the Australian chapter of the extreme right-wing online hate group Sons and Daughters of Ultra-White Supremacy.
It's an outrageous slur to suggest that we've got anything to do with Nazism, isn't it, mein Liebchen?
Damn straight.
I mean, yes, we like reading about history, and some of that is World War II, particularly the Axis powers. But are we supposed to avoid reading Mein Kampf and watching Triumph of the Will or buying illegal iron crosses on the dark web just because some virtue-signalling woke ABC watching snowflake decides to cancel Hitler?
Currywurst and sauerkraut.
Ooh, thank you. Last time I looked, we were living in a free country where you could do anything you wanted with impunity. It's political correctness gone. Although, I suppose you're not even allowed to say that anymore either.
Larry works part-time cleaning the blood off bulldozers at the local abattoir, and in the name of workplace sensibility, wears his replica SS uniform under his clothes. During lunch and tea breaks, though, he will often scream at his co-workers through a megaphone, despite management insisting it be switched off and that he yell mainly about Buddhism.
It's important to have boundaries, I think. Someone wants to eat their cheese a certain way or have their hair a certain colour, that's fine. As long as I don't have to understand it, we should tolerate it. But Larry brings up a lot of good points that's neither here nor there. It's like what Voltaire says, keep the bloodlines pure and there won't be any trouble.
Workplace inclusivity is important here at Casper's Islamic Halal Death to the Infidels slaughterhouse, which he bought from a friend's uncle who had his citizenship revoked by Peter Dutton and was sent back to Syria for fighting with ISIS over a parking space.
I was going to change the name to Happy Farm Organic Lamb, but I didn't want to trigger those single origin latte-sipping green left activists and have them gluing themselves all over my driveway, although I respect their right to have their view.
Hitler was vegetarian.
He sounds like a nice man.
Each weekend, Larry goes on a camping holiday to the Grampians with others from his online chat room.
We train and learn how to assemble weapons while blindfolded and go swimming together. Then we post pictures of ourselves on the internet for the news bulletins to use when everyone complains about us. It's freedom of expression in a pluralistic society, and it seems to work.
Jasmine Fart from one of the Home Affairs Department's many hundreds of cybersecurity surveillance teams agrees.
We are born with certain inalienable natural rights, which we agree to curb or give up entirely in return for having what remains of those rights protected from people like us.
And people are OK with that?
If anyone has a problem with it, they have every right to raise it. They can raise it on TV with Peter Dutton, and he will accuse them of protecting pedophiles. That usually shuts him the fuck up.
One more question, if I may. Winifreda Bubon, mad as hell.
Well, not coming up because Tomorrow Tonight is on in a minute.
Cost of Prince Andrew's legal settlement forces family members to busk. New version of water polo, not very interesting. And Kim Jong-un fires missile at menswear store that sold him this vinyl bomber jacket.
And finally, how did Senator Fierravanti-Wells' Liberal Party colleagues react to her budget night blow-up? Well, reactions range from "oh Christ, not again" to this from Senator Holly Hughes.
I'm not quite sure dignity and grace will be two words that follow her out the door.
Exactly, because they'd have to have been in the building in the first place. Goodbye.
I'm running for Prime Minister.